All right, arrays. So today in this lecture, I'm gonna cover like the first half. So I will try to get up to everything on this slide, arrays of objects, and then on the next lecture on Thursday, we will cover the rest. And this one shouldn't be too hard because we worked with arrays a little bit in PLD 101, but those arrays were in Python. So Java has its own quirks, obviously, as Java always does. And but generally everything is the same. It's just the syntax and a couple of more things that you need to be familiar with. So arrays in Java, it's the same thing. It's list of data elements, and the only thing that you need to know is that your array can store data, only one type of data at a time. So if you're creating an array of integers, those array will be can only consist of integers. The same thing with strings, floats, doubles, any other data type, any other objects. So your array can only hold the same data type of elements. So this is how you would declare your reference to an array in Java. So you would put the data type that you want this array to have, then square brackets, you would put a space and the name of your array with a semicolon at the end. So array is considered an object in Java the same way as a string is considered an object in Java. So you have to treat it the same way as you would treat any other object. And this is how you would create your array. And then you would assign how many elements you want your array to have. So in this case, you can see that we declared our array first, and then we are putting a name, the same name that we used to declare. Then you put an equal sign. You would put a keyword new, the same way as with every object we put a keyword new. You would put new, and then again you would put the data type and how many elements you want your array to hold. In this case it's 6, and this is what your array will look like. So all of these elements, there are 6 of them, 1 2 3 4 5 6. All of these elements will be initialized to 0, and as always our index in array starts at 0, the same way as in Python. Nothing's really different. You can also do it in just one statement. So you just combine this part, and this is what you will get. Integer, square brackets, the name of your array, equals new, the same data type, and then how many elements you want your array to have. As I said before, you can do any types of data for your arrays. In this case, see, we have float, char, long, double. The only thing that you need to pay attention to is that whenever you're doing that, these two have to match right here. So these two words, they have to match, otherwise you will get an error. All right, yes, I mean, obviously your array size has to be a non-negative number because we cannot have negative number of elements in our array, so only positive numbers. And you can also either just use a number, or you can do a constant, or you can do a variable. So that's also an option. So in this case, we are using a constant called array size. And how do I know that it's a constant? First of all, because it's all caps, and second of all, because we have a word final right here. So this is a constant, equals to 6, and this is just another way to type out this sentence right here and have 6 elements assigned to your array. Now, whenever you create your array, you cannot change the size of it, so your size will be fixed. You can only create a new array to give it more elements, to give it more space. But in Java, once you create your array, once you give it a size, you cannot change it. Yes, so accessing, this is how you would access the elements of your array. So you would use your reference name, the name that you called your whole array, and then you would put whatever number, whatever index you want to access, you would put it right here. So you need to know the subscript of the element that you want to access, and you need to put it inside of your square brackets. And in this case, you can see that 0 is this one. Our first one is 0 because we start counting at 0. Then the second one has a subscript of 1. The third one has subscript of 2. So each element will have a subscript of the order of the element minus 1. And in this case, we are assigning 20 to our first element of the array. This is how you would do it. You can treat your array elements as any other variable, just don't think of it too much. You can use it as any other variable that you have. The only difference is the way you would type it out. And the way you would type it out is just like this. So whenever you want to access some type of number, you would just use the name of the array and the subscript. So the same way as you're assigning elements, the same way you are going to be accessing your elements of your array. As I said before, your index will always start at 0. So the first element will have an index of 0, and the last element will have an index of your array length minus 1. So in this case, we have 10 elements, right? We are creating an integer array called values that is going to have 10 elements. However, the last index is going to be 9 because 10 minus 1 equals 9. So your last index is going to be 9 and your first index is going to be 0. In for loops, whenever you're going to be using your for loops, you will typically see I, J, and K used to count the variables. And if it helps you, you can think of I as the word index. So you will see that whenever you loop through your for loop, people will use in many examples the I for the name of the variable that's going to count through your array. Now, yes, arrays are objects, and you can also check the length of your array. So the length is a variable for your array class. So you can check the length of your array just by typing this right here. So you would use your name of the array and then you would put period and the keyword length. And this will return the number of elements that are in your array. In this case, we are creating an array of doubles called temperatures, and we want this array to have 25 elements. So whenever you would run this sentence right here, this will return 25 because we just assigned our array to 25. So this is a great way to check how many elements your array can store. Now in this case, we have a for loop, as you can see here, and this for loop will loop from 0 up until the last element in the array. And how do we know that? Because we are using the keyword length, and we're trying to find the amount of elements in the array, so our loop can loop until the last element in that array. Now, you can see here that we are using just a less than sign, not less than or equal, because if we use less than or equal, then we will get an array index out of bounds exceptions. And that will happen because if we are creating an array of 100 elements, and then we are trying to run this loop up until 100, that's not going to happen because we do not actually have our index ends at 99. So our index will end at 99 and not 100. That is why if you try to search for an index that has a subscript of 100, this is the error that you will get because there is no such subscript and there is no such element at the position 100. When you have when you do not have a lot of elements that you need to initialize, you can just do it this way by using a list. So you would create there's supposed to be a space here. So you would just declare your array the same way, and then you would just list all of the elements that you want your array to have in curly braces. And then again, this is how you would access it. So this is going to be your first element with a subscript of 0. This is your second element with a subscript of 1, 2, 3, and so on, so on, so on, until the end. You can also, here's a couple of ways to declare your array differently. You can either put your brackets after your data type, or you can also put your brackets after the name. However, you will usually see people do it this way because it's just more common. And you can also declare multiple arrays on the same line. But if you declare it this way, it doesn't matter how many variables you want to declare. However, if you do the alternate notation, if you're doing this notation, you have to specify the brackets after each of the variables. So in this case, if you're declaring all of these on the same line, your numbers will be an integer array, your codes will be an integer array, but scores is just going to be an integer variable because there is no brackets after the scores. So just be aware of that. Now, okay, working with your array contents. So as I said, you can use it as any other variable. There's nothing new there. The only difference is you have to access a certain element and you have to access the right element that you want to work with. And you can use all of these like pre and post increment. It works the same way. So the plus signs will just, this is a pre increment, this is a post increment. They will do the same thing. They will just add 1 to whatever value is stored inside of your array score at a subscript 4. So for example, this one, score 4, let's see where our first element is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this will return as 11, and this operation will make it 12 because we add 1. Now this score 2, so let's look at where's our element number 2, 0, 1, 2. In this case it's 9, and we're adding 1, so this will return 10. You can use them with relational operators if your array is a double or if your array is an integer or a float. If it's a numeric value, then you can use it with relational operators. And this will work the same way as it works with variables. You're just going to check if this value that is stored at cost at the location of 20 is less than the value that is stored at the location of 0. That's all it's gonna do. Works absolutely the same way as any other variables. And you can also use them as your loop conditions. That is also a possibility. As I said, everything the same as with variables. You can also, so this is an enhanced for loop. This is a simplified way to process your array. And this loop will always go through all of your elements. And here is the example of that. So in this case, we have an integer array called numbers that has numbers 3, 6, and 9. So this is the way you would write your loop to go through your whole array. So you would put the keyword for, then you would open your parentheses, then you would put integer value, some sort of value that will loop through your array, and then you would put the array that you want to loop through. In this case, it's numbers, and all this loop is going to do, it's just going to print all of these values in our array. So it's going to print the next value is 3, then it's going to print the next value is 6, then it's going to print the next value is 9. You can also use the length constant that is provided to you by the array class, and you can use it just to make sure that your array and that your loop goes through the whole array, through all of the elements. This is how you would do it. You would put 4, then you would create your variable that's going to go through all of your array. In this case, an integer I. You assign it to 0, and then you would tell your for loop what is the last element that you want to go through. In this case, it's as long as I is less than the length of our array. And then we just, here we are telling our loop to increment by 1 each time that it goes through each iteration. So in this case, temperature, what is going to print? Temperature plus whatever value is stored at the index of our array, and then is going to actually print that value. So we do not have temperature here, but with this, for example, if we take the numbers, this would print temperature 3, then it would print temperature 6, and then it would print temperature 9, and then your for loop would just stop executing because it would get to the end of your array. You can also let the user to specify the size of an array, but again, you have to be careful with that because once your user specifies a number, you cannot change it. So once the user sends that number to you, there's no way that you can change your array size without creating a completely new array. So whenever you're writing your programs, just be aware of that. And this is the way you would do it. You would use your scanner to read from the keyboard. Then you would ask how many tests do you have, or whatever number it is, whatever word it is that you want to use. And then you would store that in some sort of variable, and then you would just assign that variable as the size of your array. All right, reassigning array references. So you can create a you can create a new reference to your array. As I said, you can create once you create your array, you have to reassign your whole array to a new value, and this is how you would do it. So in this case, we're creating an integer array called numbers, and we assign it to have 10 elements, right? Our first go to have 10 elements. However, if, for example, we do not want our array to have 10 elements anymore, this is what we would do. We would also have used the keyword new and then put how many elements we wanted to have. So the same sentence as right here, you would use it right here, just with a different number. And this is what it will look like in theory. This is what it looks like, how it goes on in the inside of the computer. So this is how, when we assigned it to 10, you will see that there's 10 squares right here, so 10 locations. However, here is when we reassigned it to 5. So your address of your variable will point to a different location, will point to the new location with 5, and this will just get marked for garbage collection, and this will not exist anymore. So this will not copy your array. You might think that this is the way to copy your array. This is not the way. This is not going to happen. And the right way to copy an array is actually much more complicated, because in this way, you will just have two variables pointing to the same array. You will not have two different arrays. No, it's going to be one array that is the same, and you will just have two variables that will be pointing to the same thing. And if you want to have two different copies, this is the way to do it. So you would create your first array and assign whatever numbers you wanted to have. Then you would create your second array and create as many elements as in the first array. And then you would use your for loop. And as long as your index is less than the length of the first array, you would copy elements one by one into your new array. You can also pass your elements to a method. Again, as I said, works the same way as with variables and with any other object. The only thing that you have to specify is the data type. So nothing new here. In this case, you just specify the data type of your array, and you mention that it is an array, that it is not a variable. And you do it by putting the square brackets at the end. Let's see, again, this operator, this equal sign, it will not tell you if your arrays are the same. Because remember when we talked about objects, I think if you go back to video for chapter 6, I talked about comparing two objects, and the equal sign will not compare the two objects for you. It will only compare if the addresses of those of those arrays are the same. So in this case, you can look at these two arrays that they're seemingly the same, right? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, they have the same elements. The only thing that they have differently is the name, and that's the main thing. This will return false. Even though these arrays are the same, this will return false because these arrays are stored in two different locations. So for your computer, these two are completely different. Even though to our eye, when we look at it, these look the same, right? 5, 10, I mean, they have the same elements. But to our computer, they cannot recognize that these are the same. So if you want to check if your arrays are actually the same, this is the code that you would have to write. And I know that it is a lot, but it is what we have to do. And all that we're doing here, we have a while loop that's going to determine if your elements are the same inside of each of the arrays. So we are comparing the element of our first array to the element of our second array. But this is the whole code. It's in our PowerPoints. If you want to go through it, you can open it and go through it line by line. All right, some useful array operations. So this is code for finding your highest value in your array. And again, this is another piece of code to finding your lowest value. And these are just for loops with a little if decision structures inside. So let's go through it. So this shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be a space here. All right, so we have an array of integers called numbers, and we are assigning it to hold 50 elements. Now, we start with our first element and we assume that it is the highest element in the array, that it is the highest value, right? And then we just go through every other element that our array has, and if our element that we are looking at is bigger than the number that we store in highest, then we just flip them. Highest becomes the number that is at the element that we are looking at. That's all it is. The same thing here. The only difference is these two signs. If the element that we're looking at is less than our lowest number, then we just flip them again. So nothing too complicated, only the syntax. This is how you would do your total. So how you would run a function that's gonna just combine all of your elements together. Also pretty similar, is just a for loop, and then you just use the plus equal sign, which stands for just total equals total plus units. That's all that plus equal sign stands for. Now this is how you would calculate your average. This is how you would calculate your average. In this case, it's the same thing. So we have a accumulator that's going to run our total. Then we're going to create a variable that's going to hold our average. And then all we do is we're using the same piece of code that we use here to sum all of our values in an array. And then we just divide our total by the length of our array, which the length of our array will give us the amount of elements that we have in our array. Partially filled arrays. All right, let me see real quick. Let's continue. Partially filled arrays. So you do not have to fill out the whole elements of your array. So for example, if you have an array and you wanted to have 100 elements, you do not have to assign all 100 elements at the same time. There's no need for that. Your Java provides you with an ability to just partially fill your array. In this case, you the proper way to do that, you should provide a number for the size of your array, the biggest number of elements that you think your array might need. So you should always go with the bigger number, with the larger number. So for example, if you think your array can have 50 or 60 elements, you do not know how many, just go with 60, because it's not gonna harm you in any way. Just go with the bigger number. And yeah, you can just assign as many elements as you want to your array. Doesn't have to be, in this case, it's 100. It doesn't have to be 100. If you want to just fill 1 or 2 elements, that's fine. All of your other elements will be automatically assigned to 0. You can store your arrays into a file, and you would use a print writer. Again, the same idea as when we were working with files. And this is the way you would do it. You would use your for loop. Again, you will see the for loops so much when you're working with files or with arrays. Sorry, they're gonna be everywhere. So for loops, probably the only thing that you're going to see. Sometimes you will also see a while loop, but the for loops are the majority whenever you're working with your arrays. So in this case, what are we doing? This will go through the whole array, so through all of the elements of our array, and all we're doing is we're just printing each element into a file. That's all we're going to do. And after we're done printing all of the elements to a file, we're just going to close our file. So nothing too complicated. Again, it works the same way as it works with the variables. This is how you would do try with resources. You can go back into our files PowerPoint if you do not remember what it is, or into our files lecture. And this is how you would do try with resources. And this is how you would read your contents of a file into an array. So in this case, we printed our array to a file, but in this case, we are trying to read whatever's in a file into our array. However, for this one, you have to know the size. You have to know how big your array should be, which is sometimes can be really complicated to know. However, in this example, we are assuming that we know the size, and in this case, it's 5. We're creating our array of numbers that can store up to 5 elements, and then we are trying to open our file with scanner. Right here, we are opening our file called values.txt, and we are opening this file for reading. Then after that, after we open our file successfully, again, we're assuming that we opened our file successfully, we have our while loop right here. And what it does, as long as our input file has some data, which this is what has next stands for, has next will return either true or false. So as long as has next returns true and our index is less than the size of our array, we are just going to store whatever is in our file using the next int. We are going to store it into our array. This is all that this loop is doing. And this is the way to store contents of your file into an array. You can also return your array. So whenever you're creating your own methods, again, as I said before, the same thing as with variables, you just need to specify that you are returning an array. So your data type of return is going to be your array. And then at the end, you just need to put whatever you're returning. In this case, you're returning an array. Also, another thing, your array is not limited just to primitive data. And primitive data, remember, it's integer, float, double, and all of these character arrays. However, a string is considered an object, so you can create an array of string objects or any other objects that you want to create. You can create an array. In this case, we are creating a string of array called names that has values Bill, Susan, Stephen, and Jean. Yeah, I mean, if you do not provide a list like this of your values, you have to specify how many elements you want your array to have. The same idea as with any other arrays. But the only difference is when you're creating an object array instead of primitive data type, you will have the value null if you do not assign any of the values to your arrays when you're initializing it. However, you have to initialize your array by hand if you're not doing it this way. You have to do it by hand, and this is the way you would do it. So you would just use the name of your array, then the index of whatever element you want to access, and you would change that element from null to whatever the value you wanted to have. All right, I think this is the last thing I'm gonna cover today. Since our string array is considered a string objects array, we can use the same method that we use on strings. We can use them on our elements of a string object array. So these are the string methods that we have: to uppercase, compare to, equals, and character at. And this is the way you would use them. You would just put the element that you want to access by putting the name of the array and the square brackets, and inside of the square brackets you would put the subscript, and you would just put a period and the name of the method that you want to use. So in this case, everything that's stored inside of the names under 0, in this case it's Bill, we are going to make it uppercase. So instead of having just Bill, we're going to have Bill, like this. All letters will be uppercase. And the only difference that you need to pay attention to and you need to be aware of is that your string objects have a method called length, and your array will have a field named length. Those are two different things. They do not work the same way. While your length without the parentheses will return the number of elements, the length with the parentheses can only be used on a single element of your array, and in this case it's going to return how many characters that element has, how many characters that string has. So the only difference is length is a field, which is a variable, which is another word for variable, and for strings, length is a method, which is used with the parentheses at the end. All right, that will be it